if this is the first time you've ever found one of my videos, I need you to make me one promise before you hear another word. Please don't leave, because if you leave before I finish what I'm about to tell you, you may never understand why I made this for you, and I don't think I could ever explain it again the same way. In fact, if you don't love me, if somewhere deep inside your heart there isn't even the smallest place where you wonder what it would feel like if our lives somehow found each other, then maybe you really shouldn't watch this. Not because I'm trying to manipulate you, not because I want to guilt you into staying, but because this video was never made for strangers. It was made for one woman who has lived long enough to know that love isn't measured by flowers, expensive dinners, or perfect words. It's measured by who stays when life becomes unbearably ordinary. It's measured by silence, by patience, by forgiveness. By choosing the same person on the days when nothing feels magical anymore. Maybe that woman is you, or maybe she isn't. And that's exactly what terrifies me. Do you know what scares me more than rejection? It's the possibility that you could watch this, smile for a second, and then keep scrolling as though I never existed, because the truth is, you don't know me, but somehow, I've spent countless nights thinking about you, not your face, not your age, not the color of your eyes. I've imagined your heart. I've imagined the quiet moments nobody else gets to see, the moments when you close the curtains after another exhausting day, when the house becomes silent, when everyone else believes you're strong. But inside, you quietly wonder if anyone will ever choose you completely, not temporarily, not conveniently, completely. Tell me, have you ever smiled so nobody would ask what was wrong? Have you ever said, "I'm fine," simply because explaining the truth felt more exhausting than carrying it alone? Have you ever convinced yourself that maybe love simply wasn't written for someone like you? If you have, then maybe we've been walking toward each other without ever knowing it. Because I've been asking myself those same questions. People think or chasing extraordinary dreams somehow fills every empty space inside your chest. It doesn't. Some nights, even after accomplishing everything you once prayed for, you still sit in a quiet room wishing one person would ask, "How are you really?" Not because they have to, because they genuinely want the answer. I wonder, would you have asked me? Or would you have believed the version of me everyone else sees? The confident one, the fearless one, the man who always has another solution, the man who never hesitates, because I need to confess something, that man isn't always real. Sometimes, I'm terrified, not of failure. Failure has never frightened me. I've failed too many times to fear it anymore. What frightens me is building an incredible future, only to realize I built it alone. Can you imagine that? Imagine reaching the top of a mountain, turning around, and discovering there was nobody beside you to witness the view. What would any achievement mean then? Who would I point toward and say, "We did it"? Not I, we. I've realized something most people discover far too late. The greatest luxury isn't freedom, it isn't wealth, it isn't recognition. It's having one person who knows the worst parts of you, and chooses not to leave. Do you think people understand how rare that is now? Everyone talks about finding someone exciting. Very few people talk about finding someone safe. Safe isn't boring. Safe is sacred. Safe is the person you can cry beside without apologizing. Safe is the person who notices your silence before they notice your smile. Safe is the person who remembers the version of you that existed before the world demanded you become someone stronger. Maybe you've spent years being that person for everyone else, the dependable one, the listener, the caretaker, the woman everyone calls when life falls apart. But tell me, who do you call? Who notices when your voice sounds different? Who sees the exhaustion behind your kindness? Or have you become so accustomed to carrying everyone else's burdens that you've forgotten what it feels like to let someone carry yours? Sometimes require an apology. I'd probably pretend I wasn't nervous. We'd both act as though this was ordinary, even though inside we'd both know something impossible had just happened. Two people, who spent years surviving separately, finally discovering they no longer had to. Would you recognize that moment? Or would fear convince you to walk away? Fear is persuasive. It sounds reasonable. It whispers things like, "It's too late. You're too old. You've already been hurt. You should protect yourself." And after hearing those lies enough times, they begin sounding like wisdom. But they're not wisdom. They're wounds pretending to be logic. Can I ask you something difficult? When was the last time you allowed yourself to hope without immediately preparing yourself for disappointment? When was the last time you believed someone could love every season of you? Not just your brightest moments, but your quiet ones, your uncertain ones, your tired ones, your grieving ones, the ones you rarely let anyone see, because those are the moments I think matter most. Anyone can admire sunshine. Real love learns how to sit beside someone through the storm without demanding the rain stop first. Maybe that's why I couldn't stop thinking about making this video, because somewhere, perhaps in another city, perhaps in another country, perhaps only a few miles away, there's a woman who has quietly convinced herself that she's become invisible. Not because people can't see her, because nobody has truly looked at her. Not recently. Maybe not for years. If that's you, then I need you to hear this. You are not invisible. You have simply been surrounded by people who stop paying attention. And those are two completely different things. Before I say anything else, if these words somehow feel like they were waiting for you, I'd love for you to subscribe so we can keep having conversations like this. And tell me where you're watching from, because knowing you're out there somehow makes this distance between us feel a little smaller. You know what's strange? The older I become, the less interested I am in perfection. Perfection, real people do. Real love does. I've stopped dreaming about perfect women. I've started dreaming about honest ones. Women who tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Women who don't disappear every time life becomes difficult. Women who understand that commitment isn't a feeling. It's a decision made repeatedly. Sometimes hourly, sometimes daily, sometimes after arguments, sometimes after disappointment, sometimes after tears, especially after tears, because anyone can stay when everything feels easy. The question is, who stays after they've seen the parts nobody posts online? Who stays after expectations collapse? Who stays after misunderstandings? Who stays after fear says, leave before you get hurt again? I hope, if you're still here, you're beginning to understand why I said this video wasn't for everyone. It never could be. Because what I'm asking for isn't attention, it's courage. The courage to believe that two people who've lived full lives before meeting each other can still create something extraordinary together. Not because they're perfect, because they're willing. And I have to admit something that makes me feel more vulnerable than almost anything I've ever said out loud. Whether maybe you're sitting beside another man while listening to these words, whether perhaps your heart has already chosen a different future, I tell myself I should be happy if you've genuinely found peace, but another part of me, the honest part, still whispers, I hope she hasn't. Not because I want to take happiness away from anyone, but because somewhere inside me, there's still room reserved for someone I haven't met yet, someone I still believe exists. Someone I hope is listening carefully enough to realize, this isn't a performance, it's a confession. And the hardest confessions are never spoken loudly. They're whispered, almost like this. Because the louder someone has to convince you they love you, the more uncertain they usually are. Real love speaks softly. It doesn't need to shout, there's something else I need to tell you, something I've carried for much longer than I should have, but if I tell you now, you might misunderstand it before pressing record today. It's the reason these words feel heavier than they sound. I haven't told you the real reason yet, and maybe I'm still not ready, because once you know it, you'll understand why losing you even before we've met has felt strangely possible for a very long time. I kept thinking about whether I should erase everything I recorded today, not because I was afraid of what people would say. I've lived long enough to understand that strangers will always create stories about someone they've never met. No, I almost erased it because of you. Because if you really are somewhere on the other side of this screen, I know these words aren't just entering your ears. They're walking into places inside your heart that you've spent years protecting. And I don't know if I have the right to ask you to unlock those doors. You've already trusted the wrong people before, haven't you? I don't know their names. I don't know what they look like. But I know what disappointment does to a person's eyes. It teaches them to smile carefully, to hope carefully, to love carefully, as though happiness itself has become dangerous. I wonder if you even realize how much of yourself you've hidden over the years. Not because you're dishonest, because survival taught you to become smaller. You stopped saying what you really felt. You stopped asking for reassurance. You stopped admitting when you were lonely. Eventually, you became so good at pretending to be okay that everyone believed you. Even you. Sometimes I imagine what your evenings look like. The world becomes quieter. The responsibilities finally slow down. Maybe you make yourself a cup of tea. Maybe you sit by a window. Maybe you scroll through memories. You pretend no longer matter. Photographs. Old conversations. Faces that once promised forever. Isn't it strange? How a single sentence from years ago can still echo inside your mind. How one goodbye can continue rewriting the way you trust people long after the person who said it has disappeared. I've asked myself something over and over again. If we had met 20 years ago, Would we have recognized each other? Or did life need to break us first? Eventually becomes exhaustion. Love without honesty becomes performance. Love without commitment becomes uncertainty. And uncertainty slowly teaches the heart to stop believing. I don't want a relationship built on excitement alone. Excitement fades. Real partnership begins after excitement becomes ordinary. That's when character speaks. That's when promises become visible. Would you still choose someone on the day they're impossible to understand? Would you stay long enough to ask why they're hurting, instead of assuming they've stopped loving you? Those questions matter more to me than almost anything else. Because people don't usually leave relationships because of one enormous event. Most leave because of thousands of tiny moments when they stopped feeling understood. A conversation postponed, an apology never spoken, a fear never admitted, a silence interpreted the wrong way. Eventually, two people who once couldn't imagine living apart begin feeling like strangers sharing memories. That thought frightens me, not because I expect perfection, because I know how quietly distance grows. Nobody wakes up planning to become emotionally disconnected. It happens slowly. Like winter arriving one cold morning at a time. That's why I keep asking myself, if you ever became my wife, would we promise each other something different? Would we promise that silence would never become punishment? Would we promise that pride would never become more important than understanding? Would we promise that difficult conversations would happen before resentment had the chance to build a home between us? Because I've seen too many beautiful relationships disappear without either person truly wanting them to end, and that's the tragedy, not hatred, neglect. Love rarely dies in one dramatic moment. More often, it simply isn't protected. I need to admit something I've never been comfortable saying. Sometimes I'm scared that I'm asking for someone who no longer exists, a woman who believes loyalty still matters, a woman who thinks commitment is beautiful instead of restrictive, a woman who understands that forever isn't built because I've been trying to become the kind of man worthy of her, not impressive. Worthy. There's a difference. Impressing someone might last an evening. Being worthy of someone's trust takes a lifetime. Do you know how many times I've questioned myself before recording these conversations? More than you'll ever know, because every word carries responsibility. If I tell you I believe in forever, then I have to live like I believe it. If I tell you loyalty matters, then my actions must protect those words. Otherwise, they're just beautiful sentences. And the world already has enough beautiful sentences. It needs more honest ones. You may think confidence means never questioning yourself. It doesn't. Real confidence is continuing even while uncertainty sits beside you. I've lived with uncertainty for years. Not about my work, about love, about whether I'd recognize it when it finally arrived. About whether I'd accidentally walk past the woman I'd spent years hoping to find simply because I was too distracted, chasing another goal. That possibility keeps me awake sometimes. Imagine spending decades preparing your heart, only to miss the person it was preparing for. What if we've already crossed paths? What if we stood in the same airport one afternoon? What if we waited in neighboring queues? What if our eyes met for half a second before life carried us in opposite directions? Would we ever know? Or would that become one of those invisible moments the universe never explains? Sometimes I think destiny whispers. It doesn't shout, which means people who rush through life often miss the most important voices. Maybe that's why I wanted this conversation to be slow, not dramatic, intentional, like two people sitting together after everyone else has gone home. There's something I've hidden from you. Not because I wanted to deceive you, because I was afraid of what you'd think. You see, everyone assumes that the greatest fear in my life has always been failure. It isn't. Failure is measurable. You can learn from it, you can rebuild after it. Love is different. Love asks you to hand someone the one thing you can never replace, your trust. Seasons. Those things can be survived. What terrifies me is slowly becoming invisible to the person I love while still sleeping beside her every night. Can you imagine anything lonelier than that? To be physically present, yet emotionally forgotten. I couldn't survive that, not because I'm weak, because I know how deeply I love once I choose someone. I don't love halfway, I never have, and maybe that's been my greatest risk, because people who love deeply don't simply lose relationships. They lose futures they already imagined. They grieve conversations that never happened, vacations never taken, anniversaries never celebrated, children never held, memories that existed only inside hope. When someone leaves, those invisible dreams leave too. Nobody talks about grieving a future that never happened, but it's real, it's painfully real. Which brings me to something I promised I would eventually tell you. Earlier, I said there was a reason I almost never recorded this. I wasn't trying to create mystery. I was protecting something fragile. The truth is, there was a time when I became convinced I was about to choose the wrong woman. Everything appeared perfect. The conversations were easy. The future looked organized. Everyone around me thought it made sense. They smiled, they approved, they assumed I had finally found the person I'd spend my life with, and for a while, I tried to believe them. I tried to silence the quiet voice inside me, the one that kept asking, "Is peace supposed to feel this lonely?" I ignored it. For longer than I should have, because sometimes the hardest person to disappoint is yourself, especially after you've already started imagining a future. I almost convinced myself that compatibility on paper was enough. That shared goals could replace emotional safety. That admiration could replace deep understanding. I nearly accepted a life that looked beautiful from the outside, while quietly breaking apart inside, and that thought still haunts me. Because if I had ignored my heart for just a little longer, you and I would never be having this conversation. I would have spent the rest. She simply wasn't you. I didn't know your face. I didn't know your name, but somehow, I knew my heart was still waiting. That decision cost me more than anyone realized. People questioned me. Some walked away, others assumed I was making a mistake. For a while, even I wondered if they were right. There were nights I sat completely alone, asking myself whether I'd thrown away the only chance I'd ever have, whether I'd been foolish, whether hope had made me blind, and during one of those nights, I almost promised myself I'd never open my heart again. That would have been easier, safer, predictable, no more disappointment, no more waiting, no more wondering if somewhere, somehow, one extraordinary woman was still searching for me too. I stood at the edge of that decision, one step away from closing the door forever. And you know what stopped me? It wasn't certainty, it wasn't confidence. It was one quiet thought that refused to disappear. What if she's still looking for you? That single question changed everything. I still hear that question sometimes. Not because I doubt what I believe, because I never want to become the kind of man who stops appreciating how unlikely love really is. What if she's still looking for you? Those words refused to leave me. They followed me through busy mornings, long flights, quiet nights, and moments when the world celebrated achievements that somehow felt incomplete. People often imagine that the biggest decisions in life happen in public. They don't. They happen in silence. They happen when nobody is watching. When there's no applause, no audience, no certainty. Only one human heart trying to decide whether it still has enough courage left to trust another. That was where I found myself, standing in a future that looked successful, yet feeling strangely unfinished. And then I realized something I wish someone had taught me much earlier. Loneliness isn't the absence of people. It's the absence of being truly known. You can spend years surrounded by conversations and still wonder whether anyone has actually met the real you. Not the version that solves problems, spent too much of his life building things, and not enough of it building a home inside another person's heart. Maybe you've asked yourself similar questions. Maybe you've looked in the mirror after everyone else had gone to sleep and quietly wondered, if someone loved me exactly as I am today, would I know how to receive it? That's a frightening question, because many people spend years asking whether they're lovable. Very few ask whether they're still capable of accepting love after disappointment has taught them to expect its disappearance. Pain changes us not only by what it takes away, but by what it teaches us to fear. Some people become afraid of commitment. Others become afraid of vulnerability. I became afraid of timing. I kept wondering whether love had arrived before I was ready, or whether I had become ready after love had already passed me by. Can life really be that cruel? I don't think so anymore, because if it were, you wouldn't still be here listening. Neither of us would still believe that this conversation matters. You know what finally changed inside me? I stopped asking whether I would find the right woman. Instead, I began asking whether I would recognize her by the peace she brought rather than the excitement she created. The world teaches us to chase butterflies. I've learned to trust calm, because excitement is loud. Peace whispers. Excitement asks you to prove yourself. Peace quietly says, you can rest now. And if you ever become my wife, I hope our love feels more like coming home than winning a competition. I don't want us constantly wondering whether we're enough. I want us reminding each other that we already are. I want ordinary mornings. I want conversations that wander nowhere important. I want disagreements that end with understanding instead of victory. I want to grow old beside someone who still reaches for my hand without thinking about it. Someone who still looks at me as though familiarity has become another reason to stay, not another reason to leave. Because that's the miracle people rarely talk about. Real love doesn't become less beautiful with time. It becomes quieter. Who's to blame? I want us asking, how do we protect us? Because the relationship should never become the battlefield. It should become the shelter. Maybe that's why I asked you not to watch this if you didn't love me. Not because I expected you to love me already, but because I wanted to protect these words. Love deserves honesty. It deserves attention. It deserves people who are willing to stay long enough to understand before deciding. If someone watches this with a closed heart, they'll hear sentences. If someone watches with an open heart, they'll hear intentions. There's a difference. And now, I owe you the truth I promised from the beginning. The truth wasn't about another woman. It wasn't about heartbreak. It wasn't about failure. The truth is that this video was never really a test of your feelings. It was a test of mine. I needed to know whether I was still brave enough to speak to someone I couldn't yet see. Whether I still believed that somewhere in this enormous world, one extraordinary woman existed who valued loyalty more than excitement, character more than charm, consistency more than perfection, and quiet commitment more than dramatic promises. I wasn't waiting for a perfect wife. I was waiting for a woman whose heart still believed that forever was worth protecting. That's the secret I kept delaying. I wasn't afraid that you wouldn't choose me. I was afraid that one day I would stop believing you existed. This entire conversation, every vulnerable sentence, every uncomfortable confession, every moment I nearly stopped recording, was my refusal to let that happen, because hope is a decision, not an accident, and today, I chose hope again. Maybe you're not my future wife. Maybe our paths will never cross beyond this moment. Life is unpredictable enough that I can't promise otherwise. But if you are, if somehow these words reached exactly the woman they were always meant to reach, then I hope you understand something. I won't promise you a life without hardship. I won't promise that we'll never misunderstand each other. I won't promise that fear will never visit our home. What I will promise, the conversation instead of the silence. I'll protect your heart as carefully as I hope you'll protect mine. And every ordinary day that follows, I'll remember that extraordinary love isn't created by grand gestures. It's created by thousands of small decisions that quietly say, I'm still here. Perhaps that's all any of us have ever wanted. Not perfection. Not certainty. Just one person who continues choosing us after they've seen every imperfect chapter of our story. So if you're still listening, thank you not for believing in me, but for believing that love can still be gentle, that trust can still be rebuilt, that two people can still create a future, not because fate forced them together, but because every single day, they willingly choose one another again. And if that woman truly is you, then wherever life finds us to someone I couldn't yet see. Whether I still believe that somewhere in this enormous world, one extraordinary woman existed who valued loyalty more than excitement, character more than charm, consistency more than perfection, and quiet commitment more than dramatic promises. I wasn't waiting for a perfect wife. I was waiting for a woman whose heart still believed that forever was worth protecting. That's the secret I kept delaying. I wasn't afraid that you wouldn't choose me. I was afraid that one day I would stop believing you existed. This entire conversation, every vulnerable sentence, every uncomfortable confession, every moment I nearly stopped recording, was my refusal to let that happen, because hope is a decision, not an accident, and today, I chose hope again. Maybe you're not my future wife. Maybe our paths will never cross beyond this moment. Life is unpredictable enough that I can't promise otherwise. But if you are, if somehow these words reached exactly the woman they were always meant to reach, then I hope you understand something. I won't promise you a life without hardship. I won't promise that we'll never misunderstand each other. I won't promise that fear will never visit our home. What I will promise is that you'll never have to face those moments alone. I'll listen before I defend myself. I'll apologize before pride convinces me not to. I'll choose the conversation instead of the silence. I'll protect your heart as carefully as I hope you'll protect mine. And every ordinary day that follows, I'll remember that extraordinary love isn't created by grand gestures. It's created by thousands of small decisions that quietly say, I'm still here. Perhaps that's all any of us have ever wanted.